True spooky stories. Story 1. While at uni, my friends and I ran out of booze. Hardly any shops were open because it was late, so the only option was to walk the mile or so to the nearest 24-hour supermarket. Between the supermarket and the dorms we lived in was just row after row of suburban houses which all looked the same. As we were walking down one road, we passed a field with a large campfire and some people riding horses around it. There were people playing musical instruments and general sounds of a good time going on. The horses and fire and the lanterns which were dotted about gave it a very old-fashioned feel. Maybe 5 minutes after passing the field, now walking past houses again, one of my friends commented on how weird and out of place that gathering of people had been. My other friend and I had been thinking exactly the same thing, so, curious, we turned around and walked back to find out exactly what was going on. There was nothing there. Not just no people or horses, there was no field. Just more and more houses. Even though we were absolutely certain we were on the right road, as we'd simply turned around, we walked up and down the neighboring roads too. We found nothing. We weren't drunk, though we'd had some drinks, and so I've got absolutely no idea what happened that night. Story 2. The scariest thing I've had happened while camping. So I live in Eastern Oregon, and my mom lives in Western Oregon. I went to visit her for the summer, and she's very outdoorsy, so we decided to take the 1-hour drive from her city to the coast. We ended up at this free campsite at the top of this hill. Huge foothills of the coastal mountains, about a 25-minute drive from the top where the campsite is to the bottom, where the main road was, and we were the only campers there. We relaxed for the rest of the day, made food, etc. A truck full of men drive up the hill and talk with my mom. I don't know what about, wasn't suspicious at the time, and they leave us. Fast forward to the middle of the night. I wake up to my mom sitting straight up in the tent. I woke up easily, so I heard her gasp and it woke me. As soon as she saw I was awake, she put her hand over my mouth because I was starting to ask her what's wrong. It was dead silent, and all of a sudden you heard footsteps right beside the tent. The little flap that covers the zipper was even moving. Thankfully, my mom has quick wits and said very loudly, "Kenny grabbed the gun." Kenny is my dad, although that doesn't matter, and mind you, he was not there, just us girls like I previously said. They left. No harm was done. Thank the Lord for my mama. Story 3. I was camping in a valley by myself with no cell service. I stayed late on a trail and ran into a nice local dude as it was getting dark. He showed me a local camping spot close to the road and the river, but camouflaged. I had a fire, drank beer, and listened to my friend's comedy podcast. I was loud and visible. Because it was dark already, I decided to sleep in the back of my truck under my topper next to all of my gear as opposed to setting up my tent. The next morning, I made a fire, cracked a beer, and started making breakfast. Then I noticed that there is a man at the edge of my camp. He comes closer, but never looks directly at me. This dude looks homeless, has a long ratty beard, and has at least 100 plastic grocery bags tied all over his clothes. I comment about how nice the day is. No response from him. I offer him breakfast. Nothing. He sort of paces around the perimeter of my camp. I offer him a beer, but he just turns around. The dude is just standing there back to me, wandering around. I'm realizing that there isn't going to be any good happenings. I had my bear spray and buck knife super close. I give him an ultimatum, "Motherfucker, you are either going to acknowledge me or leave immediately." He ignores me. I grab the bear mace and walk a few steps towards him. He sulked away and I threw my shit in my truck and left that place right quick. I wonder if he had watched me during the night and I thank my laziness for staying in my truck instead of a tent. Story 4. For years ago, I lived in a very large farmhouse that was converted into 2 apartments. The house was known as the Old Boys' Home. It was used to house boys with behavioral issues, but was closed due to allegations of molestation. Anyway, I was living with my boyfriend and 3-year-old daughter at the time. My bedroom had a large fireplace that had been boarded up and painted over. I decided to push my bed up against it one day while I was rearranging things. It was like a headboard. That night, around 1 a.m., I heard a small voice saying, "Mom, Mom, Mommy." I had sat up in bed, but didn't see anything, so I reached over my boyfriend, trying to grab my daughter and put her in our bed. I kept feeling around, and I was still hearing the voice, but I couldn't feel her. My boyfriend woke up and turned the bedside lamp on, asking me, "What the hell are you doing?" I explained that Amelia was trying to get in our bed and I was reaching for her. There was nobody there. My daughter was sound asleep in her room. Then the next night came. Around 1 a.m. again, my dog had started to whimper outdoors, so my boyfriend got up to take him outside. You know that feeling in a bed when someone lies down next to you? Where the bed pushes in and there is a warmth in your back. I felt that, so I assumed my boyfriend had come back to bed. I rolled over. My boyfriend wasn't in the bed, and I felt the fucking bed release pressure. Whatever was laying next to me has gotten up in that second. I moved my bed the next day to the other side of the room, and I never had another incident in the 2 years. I remained in that house. Story 5. When my grandparents bought their house for a family of 10, my grandpa found a fake wall upstairs. He tore it down to make more room for the family. Behind the wall were children's clothes and play toys, almost like they walked off the room in a hurry. My mom told me stories of sitting in her room and something circling the walls around her, sounding like wallpaper being torn. When she moved out, my aunt moved into the same room. She would wake up with pictures she hung up laying on her chest in the morning. My cousins also have stories of hearing footsteps coming up the stairs and stopping outside their door in the middle of the night. I still don't go upstairs at their house because it's always cold and I get weird vibes up there. Even in my adult life, I have scary dreams that take place upstairs. Story 6. It's not as spooky as some other stories on here, I guess, but my so and I are still a bit bewildered by it. It's been years and we still wonder about it occasionally. There's no explanation other than some weird supernatural connection or just a really big fucking coincidence. For about 10 years now, my Nana has been living in a nursing home. She had a stroke and mentally she is not all there. She still recognizes us when we visit and gets happy to see us, but she often talks gibberish, thinking she is in a distant memory in the past. It makes me sad because she and I always had a very close connection growing up. My parents both worked a lot and she would stay with me. She used to know when I was lying. She could always sense when I was sick, even when she wasn't over, and she and I are eerily similar both in personality and looks. There are pictures of her when she was 21, and it could be me in the picture. We were very close growing up, and I love her dearly. I introduced her to my now husband when we started dating in college. He is from a different country than I am, and I live in his country. So we had been dating for a few years when my visa was going to expire. In order for us to live in one place, we decided to get married. However, we were still young, fresh out of university, and decided to just elope. We decided to get officially married at a courthouse while announcing our engagement and then having a wedding a few years later. Official documents and wedding ceremonies are separated in my husband's country anyways. No one knew of our plan. We were, and are still, stupidly in love and thrilled to have such a crazy secret between us two. In hindsight, it was stupid and no one would have judged us, especially considering we are still happily together years later, but we still decided to hide it because we were stupid kids. So we flew to visit my parents in my home country and announce our engagement, and my dad picked us up from the airport. We were chatting in the car when he told us that my Nana was freaking out while he visited her the other day, the day we decided to elope. Why was she freaking out? She announced to my whole family that she saw in her dreams that I had eloped and was now married. They dismissed her because they didn't expect that at all. She kept insisting and was incredibly lucid about it. She raised her voice, which she hadn't done since before the stroke. My dad had mentioned because he thought it was sweet that she was so worried about this and became so lucid. My husband and I just got silent in the car and I went cold. We don't know how she knew that or if it was just coincidence. But she knew somehow. We went to visit her a few days later and she didn't remember it at all. She was thrilled we were engaged. We are happily married now and had our wedding and stuff, and no one ever found out we had eloped before the wedding day, except my Nana apparently. Story 7. My mom always had dreams of things happening and would warn us sometimes about certain people. But one thing that isn't some weird freaky future dream was her always having dreams about someone on a horse, and when she met my dad, she finally saw the guy's face and it was Dad. I had similar dreams where I was following a guy around. We were always running around town smiling and laughing and having a good time, and I dated before, but when I started dating my current boyfriend, suddenly I saw a dream guy's face and it was my boyfriend's face. So now I think I'm with the guy of my dreams, which is sweet. My mom had dreams she picked us. She chose my brother and then me, and she had us, and we looked like her dream kids she picked. My brother got into bed with him and Dad and became a family. It was a cruise ship, and people were choosing their daughters, and she fought to have me. Then she had a dream where she got a call saying she would have a daughter, and she said no, and then she had a miscarriage. That one was sad. She had a dream that my brother was going to be poisoned by food by a friend, and the same night I had a dream that my brother was choking after eating or drinking something. 2 dreams was too much. My brother stopped hanging out with that kid, and that kid did have some issues later. We were thankful for our dreams. I had a dream that my grandpa came to me. He was standing. He lost his legs IRL, and he helped me up and we danced together. He was so happy and free. I woke up to the news he died that night. Dreams are fucking weird. Story 8. I posted this in a thread a while ago, but I'm gonna do it again because it applies here. When I was in high school, my uncle would throw me a couple bucks to help babysit his kids with my aunt. They lived in a 2-story house by the water, a nice area. The kids were about 3 and 6. One day I was sitting in their den on my phone when I started to hear a baby crying. Thinking it was the 3-year-old, I headed to the bottom of the stairs to check and see if my aunt was up there dealing with it. I called for her a couple times with no response. The baby kept crying. I called for her one more time, and when I got no response, I started walking up the stairs. Then I heard my cousins and aunt playing outside. All the hairs on my body stood up, and I literally felt a chill run down my spine. I quietly turned around, walked down the stairs, got in my car, and drove away. The baby was still crying when I closed the door behind me. A few years later, I was drunk at a family party and told my uncle the story. He told me that he and his wife used to hear the baby too, and apparently the previous owners had a kid die of SIDS in that room upstairs. He's uber Catholic and had a mass said for the baby. He said after that it never happened again. Still gives me the willies when I talk about it though. Story 9. I've been a caver in Florida for about 13 years, since I was about 6, and have been to a lot of caves. Never been afraid before this to go in one. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I started having this recurring dream. I would have it at least twice a year, always the same, even though I would realize I was dreaming after the first few iterations. I would fall asleep and dream of being in a cave and going into this little hole in the bottom. Inside, I would see a 10 to 15 foot long corridor about 2 to 4 feet high. At the end, it would always turn left, and I always saw a bent red stop sign at the end, like someone ripped off the top 2 feet and tossed it in. But I would always follow the corridor. I would turn and walk past the sign despite being scared, despite many times knowing what was there, and the corridor would start descending, quickly opening up into a large vertical chamber with the path leading down in a corkscrew. Everything became blurry at this point, but it was always the same. I saw trash scattered on the walls. I saw the pit leading down to a curved floor. I saw things undefined, animals or people or something else at the bottom. And I saw my family, each with one of the things, being tortured and killed, every time, and I could never do anything. After I saw that, I would be stuck for a few seconds until I felt more than seeing everything turn and look at me, and I would wake up. Not like a normal dream where you just drift to consciousness or a nightmare where you bolt up in fear, but like something pushed me out, like I wasn't supposed to be there. So I have this dream multiple times a year until I turn 15. I did tell a friend about the dream before what happened next. My father decided to take us to some caves we had never been to before, one of which was Dog Drop. It was likely named so because someone either threw their pet in there or a coyote fell in and the body was later discovered. Dog Drop had a roughly 30-foot rappel straight down to enter. I went down with my brother while my father waited up at the top. There was a hole in the ground. I started to feel uneasy, though I didn't know why. So I followed my brother into the hole. I felt worse as I moved down. And when I looked up, I saw the same corridor, the same turn, the same wall, the same bottles at the corner. And I instantly was hit with this overwhelming sense of nausea and fear and being watched, and everything was screaming at me to leave. I froze and must have made some noise because my brother turned around and asked what was wrong. I managed to say I wanted to leave now and climbed out as quickly as I could, followed immediately by my brother. We packed up and left. Never have gone back and never will. Haven't told anyone what actually happened. Just said I wasn't feeling well, and they forgot pretty quickly. The thing that really makes it creepy for me is I have never had the dream again. Year after year, I would have it consistently, but it just stopped after that. But I still remember it all. And I still feel afraid, almost an external fear, when I think of it. Previous edit for safety. I saw some people talking about looking up the cave/visiting. Just want to say, never go caving, especially in an unfamiliar place, without a guide who belongs to a local group. If you belong to another group but have never been in the area, it's best to talk to a local one before leaving. Caving is dangerous and people die. Don't be arrogant and try and rappel on a garden hose. Yes, someone did that. Yes, they died. The local grotto you can check out is called the Tampa Bay Area Grotto, and yes, the initials are Teabag. Story 10. Back when I was a kid, my grandmother had a really close friend who used to help her babysit us. One day, she goes missing. Family doesn't know where she is, and we don't either. About a week later, police found her body in a dumpster. She had been dead for 4 to 5 days. She had been mugged and had several stab wounds. Incredibly tragic. Who would mug an old lady? Here's the spooky story. A few days just before she was found, my 3 cousins swore they saw her walking around in their backyard and knocking on their window. The following day, a search went through the area. It wasn't until the body was found that we realized what they saw couldn't be true according to the police timeline, but they swore it was her. Edit. I'm adding more context for the story. I initially kept it brief because I didn't want to have a wall of text, but since this blew up a bit, I'll include more details. The backyard was actually pretty big and long because it was shared by the entire apartment complex, which had 4 units. 2 upstairs, 2 down. My cousins were in the downstairs unit on the left. Again, like I said in a different post, it was gated on all sides by wooden fencing. My cousin's window had blind spots, so you couldn't see the entire backyard. It wasn't nighttime, but the sun was setting. They said it was almost down at this point, so I assume around 7 p.m. They're in their room, which has a window that sees into the backyard. It was ghetto and they were pretty poor, so their beds only had the mattress, not the frame supporting it. It was a queen and a single pressed up against the wall with the window. So basically, to look into the backyard, you were standing up on a mattress looking against how you normally face, back against the wall, sitting down on the mattress. Youngest brother. Holy shit, there's someone in the back. She just walked away. Oldest, laying down on the bed. WDF are you talking about? Youngest. Dude, it looks like old lady. She's walking around where grandma's vegetable garden is. Come fucking look. She's just walked away. Oldest, goes and looks. I don't see anything. Stop being stupid. Goes back to laying down. Little one stands there looking at him. Middle brother comes to look a moment later. Oh shit. She's right there. WEF, she's coming to us. They all look to see the lady knocking on the window. They scream, panic, and run out to Dad. Dad obviously doesn't believe them, but after a bit gives in. He goes out and checks. Nothing. So, just a side note, the way these apartments were connected, you couldn't go into the backyard from your individual unit. You had to get out into the main hall, which had a door that opened into the backyard. Story 11. I lived in an old apartment in 2002. The place was built in 1900, so it was just over 100 years old when I moved in. The living room and kitchen were fine, but the bathroom and bedroom were unnerving. Like, I just always felt like I was being watched, especially in the bedroom if the closet door was open. Those unnerving feelings just became moderately uncomfortable as I settled in. I felt safe in the bedroom, but only if the door was locked. One night, I was dead asleep when there was a loud bang on my bedroom door. When I got up the courage to get out of bed, I checked the apartment and all the windows were closed and locked from the inside. The door still had the chain secured. No one was in there. I mentioned the closet in the bedroom. I never liked going in there, and I never liked if the door was open. For some reason, in my head, I would hear gasping noises. So, for that reason, the closet stayed closed. A month or more after I was woken to the bang on my door, I was dead asleep. But something woke me up, and it was a pressure on me like being held down. It was pitch black in my room. I couldn't see anything, but I knew some was standing over me. When I could finally turn on a bedside lamp, no one was there. After that, I couldn't sleep in the dark. I had to sleep with a lamp on. That incident scared the life out of me. And after that, the unnerving feeling of being watched intensified. Friends would come over and comment about being uncomfortable in the bathroom like being watched. It became so uncomfortable for me. When I had the chance to move to another unit, I jumped at it. I packed up and got out. After me, several people rented the apartment and they would move out within months. I became friendly with the building manager and I told him that I felt the place was haunted. He kind of laughed it off. Years later, they were renovating the place. The building manager was doing some painting there and the building owner was there too. I went and checked out the apartment and it looked nicer. it didn't feel as creepy. I got to talking with the building owner, and through the course of conversation, he just throws it out there that a former tenant committed suicide in the closet by hanging themselves. He also mentioned that the original designer of the building lived in that apartment and died there. I wasn't mad when I heard that, but felt validated that what I experienced was real. Story 12. I currently live in a haunted house. I've heard voices, footsteps, lights have been turned on and off. One of the ghosts has a thing for silverware. I hear it clattering in the drawer all the time, and sometimes a knife or two will end up in the wrong slot in the drawer. But the strangest or scariest experience I had was the first night I spent in the house. I wasn't finished moving in. There were boxes everywhere. I didn't even have my mattress up there yet. I was bedding on an old futon mattress, watching a video on my phone, when I got the pins and needles feeling my feet falling asleep. Except it wasn't on my feet. It was on the top of my head in the shape of a hand. I said, "Good night," turned off my light, and tried to sleep. When I woke up, my closet door was ajar, but other than that, everything was otherwise untouched. I guess whoever my unseen roommate is just wanted to check out who I was on my first night. Story 13. I had just finished my initial military training, Basic, 8, a few other classes, and got sent to my first duty station. My unit was at NTC for pre-deployment training, so I met up with the rear echelon. I was issued my room and spent 3 very disturbed days/nights in the barracks with weird stuff happening, like gear not where I left it, locked drawers being opened, the microwave turning on by itself. Shit like that. My roommate, who I knew throughout training, showed up on the 4th day, and I told him something along the lines of, "Watch your shit. Someone's been fucking with my stuff and I don't know who." So the 4th night comes around and myself and my roommate secure our room and gear and go to bed. Gotta be up at 0530 for PT, so it's an early night. We lock all our stuff and go to bed. I woke up around 0100 cause my blanket had fallen to the ground and I was cold, which was weird cause we were in the south in summer, so it's always hot. I hop down to get my blanket and I notice my armor is open, so I open the lock, close it, lock it, and get back to bed. I fell back asleep pretty easily, but I woke up again at about 0230 and all my stuff and my roommate's stuff was thrown around the room. I wake up my roommate and he's pissed cause someone is fucking with us and can't figure out who it is. We clean it up, lock our stuff, and go back to bed. I woke up a 3rd time at 0337 and was not alone. I can hear my roommate snoring, so I know it's not him. I sat up and saw someone in the little kitchenette area with the fridge open looking in it. I was freezing again. I was about to say something as the soldier turned around. My eyes had a moment to adjust to the bright light, and then I started recognizing gear like the L-shaped flashlight on his shoulder, his Alice pack with magazine holders and canteens, boots and fatigues. This dude was combat ready. As my eyes reached his face, he turned a bit and I could see it. Half his head and helmet were gone, blown off by the looks of it. I'm scared shitless at this point. He closed the fridge, walked across the room keeping his bright green eyes on, opened my front door and walked out. As he exited, he turned back around and said to me, "Be safe." I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I didn't wake my roommate up. I just sat up in bed for about 2 hours till I had to get ready for PT. 0630 rolls around, so everyone is outside the barracks in formation getting ready to start PT, and the acting first sergeant says, "Hey, not Chase, you good? Looks like you saw a ghost." I replied with, "Negative, I'm fine. 1SG good to go." About halfway through PT, he comes up to me and asks me what's wrong because I'm visibly shaken up. I told him I was fine and just couldn't sleep last night. A few others asked if I was okay, and I just lied and said I was fine. I really wasn't, and they could see that, but they let me be. After PT ended the acting 1SG, pulled me to the side and told me to speak freely, openly, and with all confidentiality and off the record. What is wrong? I told him that if I told him what happened, he would think I'm batshit crazy. He assured me it was off record and once again said, "Talk to me. You seriously look like you've seen a ghost." That got an awkward chuckle out of me, and I began to tell him my story, and when I got to the part about his head, the acting 1SG lost his shit. "Who the fuck put you up to this? This is not funny, etc., etc." He smoked me for about 30 minutes, made me do push-ups, mountain climbers, stuff like that, all while yelling at me that I'm a piece of shit. Finally, after about 30 minutes of that, he says, "Look me in the eye and swear on everything that you love that you're not lying to me." I told him I was not lying. It fucking happened. So he says, "Follow me," so I do. We got to the command office, which I had never been in, and they were obviously locked. He takes me behind 3 locked doors and 3 rooms I had never stepped foot in, and when he opened the last door, I saw it. It gave me chills. It still gives me chills, but plain as day, there's the soldier's portrait behind the commander's desk. I froze and said, "That's him." Acting 1SG, the guy who assigned me that room, told me who it was. He was a corporal in the unit on my unit's first deployment to Iraq, and he died in an IED attack that took off part of his head. I was the first soldier to be assigned that room since it belonged to the deceased corporal. He forgave me and I forgave him, and he told me some stories about who this guy was. I deployed with that unit just a couple months later and spent 12 months fighting in that shithole. I nearly died. I don't know how many times my vehicle got hit with IEDs and rockets, and it always made me think of that corporal. I survived more things than most people can imagine, and I always felt like that corporal was keeping an eye out for me. Not everyone in my unit was as lucky as me. 3 from my company didn't get to come home. Story 14. Freshman year at my university. We had a creepy, old dorm on campus that no one was living in. Everyone generally avoided it because it just had an uncomfortable feeling when you got close to it and felt like you were being watched. There are rumored stories about it of 2 women dying there on separate occasions, one murder, one suicide, and they're the ones who haunt the building. One night, a friend was in a bad mood because his girlfriend had broken up with him, so I was walking around campus with him to let him get it off his chest and just trying to help him feel better. We walked past the dorm and I brought it up about it being haunted and was telling him the stories to try and take his mind off it. So, the way the bottom floor was set up, there were 2 doors on both sides of the building, and the hallway ran the entire length of the building, and you could see the other door. We walked up to one of the windows, and were just looking down the hall when 2 girls walked out of a room, wearing clothes that looked like they were from the 70s/80s, and stood there in the hall looking at each other, not speaking. Then, one girl slowly turned her head and looked straight at us, slowly turned her head back, then turned and walked the opposite way from us down the hall. So we ran to the other side of the building, but we couldn't find them. We came back to the original door and watched them do the same thing all over again. We looked at each other and ran. This freaked me out for a while, especially after when I was sleeping in my room and all my posters fell off the wall at the same time. After telling this story to another friend, he convinced me to go back with him and try to find a way in. We found an open window, which we later found out was the room the girl hung herself in, and climbed in and started walking down the hall. We wandered around the building a bit and just started to notice generally creepy things. Water faucets started coming on, we'd walk through one room and then back through and a chair would be moved. On the first floor, a desk was turned upside down under the stairwell. As we were getting close to leaving, a lot more water faucets came on and kept getting louder and louder. Then when we got back to the room to go back out of the window, and as we put our hands on the window, the door slammed closed. So we ripped the door open. dove out and ran back to our dorm and never went back. Story 15. I'm sure this will get buried, but I've got one. It's more bittersweet spooky than spooky, but here goes. My ex had this lamp that she had on the island in our kitchen. She turned it on pretty much every night, and in the mornings to make coffee, it was a pretty solid little lamp. I brought my cat to live with us late in our relationship because she had dogs and my cat was pretty up there in age and not used to dogs, so I tried to spare her little heart from that shock. She came to love laying down in the spot by where that lamp plugged into an outlet on the wall of the island. She died soon after I brought her over, and I was absolutely heartbroken. I had a hard time accepting the loss. About a week after my cat died, my ex was grinding coffee in a little electric grinder, and I heard her shriek from the other room. I rushed over to see what was going on, and she told me she felt something cold pass by her feet. Then the light on the lamp started flickering. She tried to show me the flickering again, but it didn't happen. I just chalked it up to her being weird at 6 a.m. A couple of days later, she asked me to make coffee for her. I grabbed the grinder, flick on the lamp to see what I was doing, and sure enough, the same thing happened to me. A cold wind whipped past me like a cat running around my feet. Then the light on the lamp flickered before I could even get the grinder going. It never happened before or after, despite the hundreds of times I'd used that grinder in the same outlet as the lamp. I like to think it was my little girl saying goodbye one last time. Story 16. My father passed away almost 11 years ago, but I've seen him 3 times since. The first time was in middle school. I was working on a family tree project and was asking my mother about his side of the family. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him walk out of the room he died in, heading towards his favorite spot on the couch. The second time was a year or 2 later. I'd had an awful day, one of the worst in memory, and as I was walking across the hall to the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of him sitting at his old spot at the table, reading a newspaper. The last time was the most clear. My senior year of high school. My mother and I were sitting at that same table, talking about college plans. I mentioned I was applying to the rival school of my father's alma mater. Just then, I saw him walk, again from the room he died in, over to the counter, where he grabbed a coffee cup and walked towards his bedroom. I guess they just like to check up with us every now and then. Edit. If this sounds familiar, I've talked about it before. Story 17. I came home from work one day to grab my spare tires. My sister was away at school 7 hours away, and neither of my parents were going to be home for another 5 hours at minimum. I ran in, changed my clothes, grabbed my tires, then drove to a garage to get them installed. I got home 2 hours later, and as I walked into the living room, there was a chair just sitting in the middle of the hallway and was facing the front door. I thought nothing of it, but didn't recognize the chair as being one that we owned. It was a standard metal folding chair that you would buy for a couple bucks at a retail store. I folded it up and propped it up against my dad's workbench in our garage. My mom gets home a couple hours later, and I ask her in passing why she left a metal chair in the middle of the hallway. She tells me we don't own any metal chairs and that she hadn't been home up until an hour ago. I told her I came home and there was a metal chair just sitting in the middle of the hallway after I had gotten back from the garage. She told me to show her the chair, and when I went out to the garage to show it to her, it was gone. I looked high and low for that metal chair but couldn't find it. I swore to her that I wasn't on drugs and that I wasn't imagining things. She thought what I was telling her was strange, but didn't pay much attention to it. I never saw that chair again, nor do I know where it came from or where it went. Story 18. I've posted in the past a story about some weird thing I saw in the woods at my grandparents' house. TLDR, the silhouette of a deer against the curtains suddenly changed. into a man's silhouette. Usual suggestions are skinwalker or wendigo, though one I liked was maybe it was just Pan joking around, but I'm gonna post about another instance of weird shit. This was at the house we lived in for about 7 years. Many strange things happened in that house. You could hear voices murmuring from time to time. I saw a shadow person, saw someone stick their head into the room once. None of it felt hostile, but the same couldn't be said for this pervasive feeling my mother and I both felt if we went out front at night. She and I both felt like there was something watching and it wasn't friendly. On this particular night, it was about midnight or so, and I felt like driving to the 24/7 grocery store since I wanted some snacks. As I stepped out the front door, I saw something out of the corner of my eye and turned to look. There was this very tall thing just floating. For lack of a better term, I'd almost describe it as hanging, but there was nothing holding it up, outside of my brother's window. It was seemingly covered in a sheet that had once been white, but was extremely dirty, so it was more off-white, and got brown with mud and dirt the further down it went. There were no visible feet, nor eyes or face, but I could tell it was staring at my brother's window. As I stared at it, it turned to look at me, and I remember feeling like one of those butterfly specimens, pinned to a board. It was as though its stare was physically holding me in place. It felt like an eternity, but only a second or two passed, and it looked back at the window, the pressure lifting, and then vanished. Right as it vanished, there was a fluttering of wings in the tree above, and one of our neighborhood's owls came to perch there. In a way, it felt like the owl came to my defense, as silly as that may sound. Our cul-de-sac loved the pair of owls. They were more like neighbors to us, so maybe it was just protective of a fellow neighbor. That's how I like to think of it anyway. In any event, I decided that it might be best to just make some popcorn or something that night instead. Come to think of it, I don't think I ever told my brother about the thing. I probably should. Story 19. When I was about 12, I was at my cousin's house. He was about 9, fucking around on their trampoline. This was an older neighborhood, kind of dilapidated. My cousin and I get the bright idea to sneak into the old abandoned house on the other side of his fence. So we climb the fence, walk the narrow path between his fence and the side of the old house. We were barefoot, WTF, and go around to the front of the house. The front door was actually modern, a steel door with a lock on it. We tried it and it opened. We went inside and the smell hit us like a wall. This sweet, sickly smell filled the whole house, so we held our noses as we walked through. There was no glass on the floor, which was fortunate for our aforementioned bare feet, but there was a lot of dust. It was a shotgun house with maybe 4 small rooms that we could tell, and in the front room there were like 6 or 7 mountain bikes. We figured someone was just storing things here. The bathroom was off this room, and it had a bunch of small, old glass bottles that looked like they dated back to the 1940s or thereabouts. The second room, past the first, had a bunch of old junk in it, but the thing that sticks out in my mind was an old cassette player with a cassette still in it. On the label, the cassette said, Deborah, March 18th, 1993. We didn't really care about this. The third room had more bikes and more junk, and it had a tiny closet off to the side. We wrestled the cobwebs away and saw nothing other than a fucking chainsaw with red-brown residue on it. Alarm bells were going off in our heads now, and even though we tried to rationalize it as just rust, we decided to quickly see what was in the fourth room and then GTFO. We walked into the fourth room and saw that it was completely empty, except for some stairs to the basement, lots of dust, and a small wooden cross. Painted on it were these words, Deborah, September 29th, 1963, March 18th, 1993. Then we heard a thump from the basement. Then we ran. We ran out the front door, down the path, climbed the fence, through my cousin's backyard, into his house, up the stairs, into his room and under the bed. We stayed there for hours, whispering and speculating and vowing never to go back there again. But we did. And that's another story for another day. You might think this is fictional, and I kinda worded it that way, but I can't make this up. Update. I actually went back to the house yesterday and it's been torn down. Disappointing, but also kind of a relief. Story 20. My high school used to be a giant mansion before it was converted into an orphanage and then a high school. One section of the school, the third floor, was inaccessible. The staircase which led to the floor was blocked off with wood and painted black to match the chorus room where it was located. In 2003, during the fall school show of Les Mis, they had to remove the wood so they could replace the windows on that third floor. We even ended up using some of the removed windows for our barricade. We had play practice most nights, and if you lived far enough away, usually you would just stay at the school and wait rather than go home just to come right back up. While waiting for practice to start one night, myself and 3 friends Ryan, Mike and Michelle decided to go up the staircase to check out the third floor. The staircase was rotted and falling apart from years of disuse, so we carefully went up one at a time to find an unremarkable hallway with some even less remarkable rooms off to the sides. All of this leads into a big open area with old, stacked desks and folders full of test papers from like the 80s or something. The 4 of us were a bit disappointed because the rumor was that this section of the school was not converted from the orphanage that occupied the space several decades earlier, and the ghosts of orphans still haunted the place. Since we didn't get spooked, we ended up just digging through the old papers. While Michelle was looking through the papers in a side room with her back to us, Ryan pushed Mike and myself out of the room quietly and into an adjacent room to scare Michelle into thinking we disappeared. Sure enough, she comes bolting out of the room screaming at us, throwing out, "Fuck you guys," and "This isn't funny." We had to muffle our mouths to keep from laughing when, all of a sudden, one of the people in the room fucking ruined the whole thing by giggling like a little girl. I turned to Ryan and Mike to see which one of them ruined the joke, but both of their hands were over their mouths, and their eyes were wide as dinner plates. This room we were in, hiding behind the door, was small. Maybe the side of a small, one-stall bathroom. Maybe that's what it was once upon a time, and somebody in this goddamn tiny room was giggling, and it was none of us. This whole plot played out in probably like 10 seconds between leaving Michelle and hearing the giggle. So we stood there staring at each other waiting for something to happen that explained this. It was like 4 or 5 p.m. and we were the only ones in the chorus classroom the entire day. We would have seen someone go upstairs. We would have heard the stairs creaking as they went up there. Whoever giggled at us from inside that room was up there already. Unfortunately, we didn't get the explanation we needed because a second set of giggles started happening, this time more than one person making them. That was it for Ryan, a big, tough former athlete turned show kid who screamed the highest pitch scream I've ever seen a guy that size make. It would have been funny if we weren't terrified. He pushed past us, ran screaming out into the hallway, scared the daylights out of Michelle on his way down, and we bolted down the steps. This time, we did not take them one by one, and actual chunks of rotted wood started falling off. We explained what happened to Michelle, and then went somewhere that was not the chorus classroom until play practice started. The maintenance team must have known we were up, because we all collectively got to talking about going up there. Safety concerns with the rotted steps. So of course, people started going up there willy-nilly hoping to see a ghost. There are more stories about that third floor during that year that promptly stopped once they replaced the windows and sealed the room back up. Now the school is closed and empty, so whatever ghosts were having a good time are now free to do so, without the living getting in the way. Edit. Sorry, this is much longer than it seemed when I posted. TLDR, ghost orphans at my high school think pranks are funny. Story 21. About 5 years and 2 boyfriends ago, I moved into an old farmhouse with my then significant other. He was a hoarder and was embarrassed about the state his house was in after his wife left him. He had an RV and that's where he slept, because there was just shit garbage, clothes, boxes up to your knees in every room of the house. Me, being extremely distressed by clutter, cleaned that house. Down to cobwebby corners of the ceiling. It took me weeks, but I Murphy oiled every inch of wood and filled his truck with over 10 loads of garbage. The very first night I was there, things were weird. At that point, I had only cleared part of the living room. The boyfriend snored unbearably loud, so I opted to sleep inside, on the couch, while he slept out in his camper. I had just had a fight with my mother and was lying awake around 4 a.m. fuming about it. I heard my boyfriend come in the back door, muttering to himself as usual. He was opening and closing drawers and cabinets in the kitchen, figuring he was searching for something. Finally, I got up because, hell, I was already awake. Maybe I could help him find whatever it was. The kitchen was 5 feet from where I was, and when I walked in, there was no one there. I looked around and called for him, but he wasn't there. I don't get scared easily, and at this point, I was just curious about where he was. I went out of the camper and could hear him snoring hard before I even got to the door. I shook him awake and asked him gently what he had needed in the house. He said he hadn't left the camper all night. I thought, he was sleepwalking. When I went back inside, though, I noticed it had snowed lightly in the night and the only tracks leading up to the camper were mine. Couple days later, I moved my 2 cats in. They are super on edge, a lot of growling, acting out of character, especially in the middle of the night. I completely dismissed that as it was a new, unfamiliar place. Obviously, they were uncomfortable. I had finally gotten the bedroom habitable, and they would not cross the threshold into it. The first night we slept in the bedroom was when I started to fear the house. The bed was up against a window that faced out to the cornfield, and my guy insisted on sleeping on the outside of the bed, leaving me pressed against the window. I got this horrible feeling. Something was right outside the window, and I was frantic to the point of tears. I kept telling him there was something out there, and he said I was being dramatic, which was stupid, because I'm just not. You spend your whole life being logical and calm, and when something weird happens, no one believes you. I slept on the couch. The next day, I noticed a handprint on the top of the bedroom window that I had just cleaned the day prior. I held my hand up to it, and it was thrice the size of my own hand, bigger than any person's handprint I've ever seen. It wasn't just a print, though. It was elongated, as if the hand had dragged down the window. Still could be an explanation, even though I had cleaned that window the day before and would have noticed, except the print was over 9 feet off the ground directly over an open coal cellar. I showed my boyfriend, and he told me something surprising. His ex-wife thought there was something wrong with the house too. She was making dinner one day, and he had gotten home from work. Her back was turned to him, and they had a full conversation. Then she looked out the kitchen window and saw him pull up in his truck. He still blew it off with me, just telling me I was paranoid and such. All this time, I assumed he was right, dismissed my instincts, and went about things normally. Then, one morning in the spring, I got up to use the bathroom. It was 4:46 in the morning, and I knew the time because I checked my phone when I got up. The whole bedroom was light from the sunrise, and I quietly climbed back into bed. The house is all wood paneling, and because of my arachnophobia, I had the bed scooted about 5 inches away from the wall where our heads were. I laid down and tucked my arm up under the pillow with my hand over the edge. The second I closed my eyes, an icy cold hand grabbed me by the wrist and yanked down. Hard. I bolted up and, in a state of complete terror, shook my boyfriend awake and asked if he was fucking with me. He wasn't. I will never forget that grip because I had to struggle to get my hand back. I called my close friend and she said, "You know that there's a cemetery within view of your bedroom, right?" I had forgotten, but being a practical person, it had never occurred to me that there might be a connection. She said, "Let's try something," came over with a sagebrush, and we smudged the house. We were both laughing at ourselves as we did it, but the thing is, nothing weird happened after that. Well, except me falling into a hole in the floor. But I blame that on my own clumsiness. The relationship withered. I moved out, but we remain friends. He says nothing strange has happened since I left. Story 22. My wife and I stayed at a nice hotel in downtown Pittsburgh. It was where I asked her to marry me after a lavish meal. I picked the room because it came with a huge Japanese soaking tub that me, a 6'1" man, could barely see over the edge of. Anyway, the first night we stayed there, we were sleeping in the single king bed. I believe the alarm clock said it was 2 or 3 a.m. To my left, and just a few feet from me, I heard the sound of what seemed like a pencil slowly rolling down a sloped surface. It was so deliberate and loud that it woke us both up. It was also so deliberate that, while my heart thumped in my chest from the sudden noise, I quickly convinced myself that it was a pencil sliding off the desk in our room, and I went back to sleep. The next morning, to my surprise, I found that A, there were no pencils in the room, and B, there was no desk. It was my first night in the room, so I assumed that it, like other hotels, had a place to sit and write. Well, that was not the case. The only thing I could find to write with were ballpoint pens with their caps on. They wouldn't make that distinctive, loud noise that a ridged, wooden pencil makes as it rolls. Furthermore, there was no sloped surface in the room for anything to suddenly roll off of in the middle of the night/morning. The whole thing was weird enough for us to talk about it that morning. I do not believe in ghosts, but to be honest, I'd love to encounter something unexplained. I entertained the idea of a ghost pencil, but knew in my head it had an explanation grounded in reality. But that's not all that happened. That night, we were both in the soaking tub. The water was up to my chin. It was great. We were in the middle of February, a cold and miserable month in Pittsburgh. We were sloshing around in the tub having a blast, pretending we were rich. And then, from the other room, we heard the buzzing of an old microphone hooked up to a PA system. Basically, that sound of feedback that precedes an announcement. The whole room filled with the buzzing sound of microphone feedback. Our hearts thumped in our chests yet again. And then we both practically jumped out of our own skins. We heard the distinctive sound of someone blowing into a microphone to test it. Huth huath. You could see it in your head. It was so distinctive, just like the pencil. My heart went from thumping wildly to thrumming like a hummingbird's. Naked, I leapt from the tub and threw a towel around myself. That was a man blowing into a microphone. I said. My wife stayed in the tub, scared and quiet. I searched our room and did not find a speaker or any kind of speaker grill embedded into a wall or the ceiling. We could not for the life of us find a potential source for the sound other than an iHome speaker that was already playing music from my iPhone. So that was our story. We still had one more night. We were exhilarated by our engagement and the ghosts that haunted the hotel. A week later, I had the thought to email the hotel. I asked them about their building. Pittsburgh is an old town. And downtown Pittsburgh is a very, very old town. They got back to me and explained, as my jaw dropped, that they used to be an old telephone factory. I don't know why I found meaning in that explanation, or why it made everything click so well, but my thoughts immediately went to the sounds of a factory, the PA system, the drafting table, all relics from another time in that building's life. Story 23. I found and fostered a cat. She was beautiful. Snowshoe Blue Point Siamese. Basically my dream cat. And so cute. Big round eyes and little round face. I named her Penelope, Pep for short. Sadly, the stress of a new kitty was too much for my older cat, so I gave Pep to a friend. Couldn't stand to never see her again. But at that point, I'd had her for 3 months. But it just wouldn't work. She was so smart. Her favorite trick was high five because she always got a treat. She high-fived Foot D all the time wanting treats. So Pep lives with my friend Lisa. Pep had been skinny as hell when I found her, but she was getting healthier. One day I got a text from Lisa. I'm just gonna pretend you didn't know about this. For kittens. 2 gray girls, a black boy, and a blue tux boy that looked exactly like her in a different color. I had to keep him. I didn't know if my older cat would accept him, but I was going to try. I named him Pepin, and he came home at 7 weeks old. All was well. He was exactly like his mother. When I brought him home, he went right for what her favorite toy had been when she had lived with me. He did everything she had done. He slept in her screwy positions. He laid in the cat tree with a paw hanging over like he was driving a 2-seater, all just like her. He walked like her, sounded like her. He had her face and her bone structure. If I had ever known what she would do in a situation, I knew what he would do, and I have never to this day been wrong. Pep snuck out a window 3 months later and was killed by a car. Devastated doesn't come close. The next morning, Pepin hops up on my bed and sits there. Wait until I pay attention to him. Then very, very deliberately, like Pep always did, gave me a high five. I never taught him that. He never saw Pep do it. She would only do it for me, not Lisa. There was no way he could have learned it. But yet, there it was, the morning after she died. I made it. I'm right here. I'm not religious and occasionally spiritual, but I have a feeling, somehow, that that's her. Like she knew she didn't have long and repackaged herself. At first I thought I was seeing it because I wanted to. Of course there's a resemblance between mother and offspring. Of course there's similarities. But everything, and he looks, exactly like her. If they were the same color, they would be indistinguishable. And how did he learn to high five? Considering he's never done it since, and had never done it before. I can't even teach him. He knows other tricks. He can sit, stand up, fetch, roll over, but he won't learn high five.